What bugged me really is that the most successful business models of the last century are based on externalizing costs on the commons. And this has reached a dimension where I felt I'm burning the future of my own kids, and I felt hugely uncomfortable doing this.
Hello, welcome to Sustainability Voices, the podcast dedicated to exploring the impactful stories behind the voices driving sustainable change. I'm Patrick Obeid, founder of a climate tech startup and your host for this series. In today's episode, we will explore the importance of circular economy with Jörg Klein, a sustainability expert, whom I had the chance to meet during our shared experience working together at Putzmeister. Stay tuned as we uncover various facets of sustainability, voice by voice. Jörg, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Patrick. Thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure to be here. We both met through my current assignment at Putzmeister, but I think it's interesting to know for our audience that my interest goes beyond any single industry. So a lot what we're going to discuss around circularity today will be widely transferable across many, many industries. And if there's one important message that I'd like to shout out from the very beginning, it would be that materials are very, very powerful and can have a great impact on your brand, society, and the planet as a whole.
Thank you, Jörg. I'm super excited for this conversation. I'm sure it's going to be very, very insightful. That's actually a perfect segue to my first question. Materials are crucial in the design of any product, be it a t-shirt, a concrete pump, or the food we eat. Jörg, could you talk about the importance of material selection in product design for sustainability?
Yeah, I guess the basics, the fundamental principles below this start with our current tool of choice to assess impact and circularity. It's life cycle analysis. And what we do in life cycle analysis is that we look at the raw materials that we're sourcing, then at the process, how we turn them into a product, and then we look at the life phase, the use phase of this product until it reaches end of life. And if you start at the very beginning and look at the impacts of raw material sourcing, that's a very, very material heavy question. What you source there is way more important than where or how you do it. It's also true if you as a consumer look at products and want to know what their impact is. What is in there is usually a much better indicator than how it's been made or where it's been made. Then if we move to the other end of the life cycle, at the end of the use phase, that is where we enter or don't enter circularity. And then again, we've got two ways of accessing circularity there. One of them being the biological cycle, biodegradability, compostability. That is, whatever my product is, it decomposes, turns into fertile soil. We can grow new plants on there, make new materials, and close the cycle. And the other route would be the technical cycle. That would mean recycling. I disassemble my product, I take the individual components and recycle them into new ones. And the first one, the biological cycle, is something that I would put more emphasis on because it works 100% of the time. And it ensures that no matter what the user or consumer does with the product, it will never leave waste. If you go onto recycling, you always have to factor in recycling rates, and they tend to be fairly low in most economies. So that is something where you lose circularity in any case. So it would be first biological degradability and then additionally recyclability if you can, not the other way around. That would be one of the principles I'd like to put out. And both of these, they are inherent material characteristics. They have very little to do with how things are made. It's purely properties of the materials that we use. And that would be sort of the basis for our discussion for today, I guess.
Jörg, this is great. So many guiding principles and design principles to keep in mind. I think this is very inspiring to our audience. Would love to hear from you about any real world examples of circular economy practices that you've encountered or been part of.
So one thing that comes to mind immediately is a textile brand called greenaDu. It's a brand that I founded a few years ago with the hypothesis in mind to say, what's the most circular, most sustainable textile that we could do? It was more meant to be a proof of principle. I wanted to buy textiles that are completely circular, that will never leave any waste, whatever, and that have low impact materials, but high quality in terms of the materials that are used, like comfort of wearing or using them. And I couldn't. So I said, why is that? Can I show that, yes, we can do this, we can make this? And I was also inspired back then by an early study from McKinsey. It's called Climate on Fashion, if the listeners would like to look this up. And there, the material side of things was heavily emphasized. It showed that more than 70% of your emissions in your value chain are upstream of the brand. So material sourcing and material processing. Hardly any of the emissions, like 6% or something, come from the brand's operations. Negligibly small. And then you have a smaller proportion, 20-something%, which is the use phase of the textile. And that gave me a very heavy cue on focusing on the materials that I use. Now, how does this work in practice? greenaDu makes fitted sheets. What's in a fitted sheet? There's some packaging, paper-based, recyclable and biodegradable. You need a sewing thread, you need a care label, you need an elastic ribbon, and you need a fabric. And you look at all of these components and you say, if I choose all of these components biodegradably, then presumably my final product will be well biodegraded. And that's what you do. So you stay away from any petro-based plastics. The sewing thread is 99.9% in your textiles, it's polyester. So that was the first challenge. Don't take polyester. We ended up using lyocell, tensile lyocell. And you do the same with all the other components. Let's go a bit more into detail for the biggest chunk, weight-wise, in a fitted sheet. It's the fabric. And there you have some more circularity principles behind this. One of them is monomaterials are much better than blends, generally in recycling. Everything that's blended and mixed in many materials together requires separation, and that impedes recyclability. It very often impedes also biodegradability. So you want one material that's well biodegraded. In our case, state-of-the-art is also tensile lyocell. And then there are some more things that are more textile-specific. Dyes. I was looking for something that's undyed because dyes very often alter the chemical structure of the textile fiber. And that also impedes recyclability and often affects biodegradability. So I wanted the cellulosic fiber to be as natural and as unaltered chemically as I can get it. And that was not available in the market. So by that point in time, I had a first idea why people are not doing this on a large scale, because it's not that easy. So following these design principles, you design every component in a way that's biodegradable, and you can also recycle it. For cellulosic fibers, that means very often dissolving it and then respinning textile fiber. And that way you get a circular textile.
Jörg, this is great. Thank you so much for that level of detail. Reflecting back on what you said earlier, which is the what is the most important design decision that you have to make at the beginning of your design journey. How much flexibility do companies today actually have when it comes to selecting materials? Are there specific constraints that make this more difficult? I know you mentioned earlier that the raw material wasn't necessarily available in the market. I think in a world that is quickly transitioning into a more circular economy, we're going to quickly run into these constraints from a supply perspective. Would love to hear any real life examples as well that you may have that make these decisions a lot more difficult for companies today.
Yeah, so I'll stick with the example that you already mentioned, supplier and material availability. There's the aspect that some of the materials might not be available. For the thread, I'm still single sourced. There was not more to get. And for the fabric, I had half a dozen textile agents running around Europe trying to source this fabric. And you would think textile fabrics, there's tons of them. But they couldn't find anything that would match the criteria that I outlined earlier. We ended up developing this with a German knittery. It's a custom-made fabric. So the availability for the material, and then if you can't get it for suppliers who are willing to develop this with you, that is certainly a constraint that you're running into. The reason for this, I would suggest is mostly because the established materials in textiles, it would mean cotton and polyester, are just so widely abundant and cheaply available because they externalize many of the costs they have to the commons. And that's very hard to compete with. So that's one constraint that you're running into. Another one is concerning the market side of things. If you're really committing to designing to sustainability and circularity, and you have few suppliers, you naturally raise your cost of goods. And if you raise your cost of goods and you're becoming more and more premium in this aspect, that narrows your customer segment. And the more you're narrowing your customer segment, the harder it gets to market the thing, the higher your customer acquisition costs. So this is sort of a marketing challenge arising from narrowing your customer base with being highly specialized for these sustainable products. So those are sort of, the constraints, as you mentioned, there that are impeding flexibility.
Yeah, you mentioned so many things here, like pricing, customer acquisition, the branding and the marketing of your product. Sustainability is also an important element to prioritize for, I'm sure, the financial performance of your company as well. So as you can see, there are many trade-offs to be made along the decision design journey. I would love to hear from you, how do sustainability goals influence these decisions? And what trade-offs are companies willing to make? The more tangible examples, the better for our audience.
Goals are obviously a wonderful way of uniting your organization and people around them and guiding them in a certain direction. Sustainability goals are a great way to start. Now, going a bit deeper with this, but it really matters how these goals are set. And the closer they are to a positive business case for the organization, the smoother is the implementation going to be. And the easier you will find it to get a coalition of like-minded people to push the agenda forward. So if it's just a goal set top down based on a vision without the economic underpinning of a good business case and a customer need, then it's going to be a tough walk. But if you knit this very closely together with your customers and your market understanding, then it's going to be a lot easier and a lot smoother to implement.
Thank you for that, Jörg. One more topic on my mind that I'd love to reflect on is, like, where do we start? I think we live in a world full of noise. I think in today's world, everyone is really good about talking about what they plan to do, but no one really talks about what they have done. And when it comes to circular economy, I think, the time to start is now. And if I'm a company looking to start implementing circular economy practices, where would I start?
So my starting point is usually it's the customer and the market. So I would see, what are the circularity challenges that my customers face? Where do I have market opportunities? Because that's where I'm most likely to hit the sweet spot between a positive business case and a meaningful sustainability goal. And I want to work as close to this intersection as I can. So those would include questions like, where do product carbon footprints of our products occur in the customer's P&L? Are they a meaningful cost factor for them or not? Did they identify in their double materiality assessment waste as being a significant problem for their products because they have disposable products? And then that would be a good entry point for me offering a circular product. I would start with these things, looking very, very closely at where my customer can make money with sustainability and products that are good for society and the planet while solving a customer problem. And then I'm going to step in and offer this product. Now, let's be a bit more specific. Putzmeister is manufacturing construction machinery. And if you have construction sites in city centers, in some cases, they restrict the kind of vehicles that can go to city centers. Like many German cities, they already prohibit private cars that are diesel-driven from entering the city center. And if you have a customer who runs a construction site in the city center and there is a tender, whatever machinery accesses this construction site should be low emission or ideally fully electrified, then Putzmeister could step in with their Iontron product line and say, like, see, dear customer, our products enable you to enter this tender. You have new business if you choose our products. That tends to be a much smoother conversation than saying, dear customer, please do something for the environment. And that would be my starting point to go in.
Jörg, this is great. I agree. I think it's all about designing the right incentives. I'm a big fan of Charlie Munger, and I believe that the right way to drive positive behavior is to design the incentives correctly. And I loved your example because it's a true real life example of doing business in Europe and how these incentive structures are changing to enable more responsible decision making. I would love to wear the consumer hat. You mentioned the consumers a few times, and I myself am a consumer. I made a few decisions this year. I'm no longer buying a new piece of clothing. Everything I buy is used. I'm trying to make my house plastic free, even though my headphones are plastic. So I'm actually not 100% compliant with my own rules yet. Would love to hear from you. What are some day-to-day decisions that you or your family members have made to be able to embrace more the better principles of circular economy?
So a lot of our early steps were not so much about circularity. They were actually around really emissions and a carbon footprint. A few years ago, I started making carbon balances every year for my family and offsetting everything, where I said, what bugged me really is that the most successful business models of the last century are based on externalizing costs on the commons. And this has reached a dimension where I felt I'm burning the future of my own kids, and I felt hugely uncomfortable doing this. So one of the steps was, let's measure our own emissions, and we have to offset everything. This is going to be not externalizing and socializing this, but taking responsibility for the impact we have. That was the first step. And from then on, you get a better understanding what really matters. And just like your headphones, we have our compromises that we just can't make or are not willing to make because it would compromise our social life too much, for example. I mentioned earlier that my wife's family and my own family, they live abroad. Are we not traveling anymore and not seeing them anymore? No. We're looking at a way of traveling that has the least possible impact, but we still want to see our families. So there are compromises, but you make them more consciously, and you have an easier time to get rid of the unnecessary junk in your life. And I think that is where we arrive at circularity. Less things make it a lot easier to manage your life. So a bit of minimalism in there too. And if you don't have to renew your things, have a longer use phase, and have less switches in there, that is also very economic in terms of your time. It's more time saving, and that's a huge incentive. Time is the only non-renewable resource I have in my life. It's gone as we speak. So I'm very committed to making the most out of it. And the fewer things I own, the longer I use them, the more time is left to spend on the nice things in life, like talking to you now.
Jörg, this is super profound, and I think I agree with everything that you said. I loved your thoughts around minimalism, your thoughts around the incentive redesign, and your thoughts about time being the only non-renewable source we have. I think I deeply agree with all of them, and I hope, at least for our listeners, that those are day-to-day principles that they embrace in their daily living. One thing I would love to reflect on is we understand where we are, we understand where we want to be. We spoke about incentives, we spoke about design principles. Would love to take a step back and talk about innovation. At the end of the day, to be able to get to where we are at the speed that we intend to get to where we are, we need a lot more innovations in the space. Given your experience and your daily exposure, would love to hear about any innovations that you've witnessed in the last few years, or any innovations that you anticipate will drive the progression towards more circular economy in the future.
It's not so much maybe the individual innovations, but more general big trends. And I think on the consumer side of things, you and I as a consumer are facing a great future. It's going to be a lot more transparent for us to make these choices. I think product carbon footprints and the digital product passports are going to be a big trend and are going to reshape total cost of ownership and what quality means for us as consumers. If you look at the industrial space, I believe that putting a price tag on carbon emissions is going to be a big one. In general, all the impacts that were externalized in the past and gave some of the business models competitive advantage are going to be priced right now to the company. And that's going to reshape, again, what your cost structure is and what the price is that you can offer. And it's going to lead to a very different product landscape, also in the industrial space.
I totally agree with you, Jörg. And also that reminds me of what you said earlier, which is if you look back at the last century and how wealth was created, it was created at the expense of polluting a river, creating more air pollution, causing more health issues, creating more inequality. And I'm a deep believer that we're witnessing a revolution as we speak, right? With the more transparency comes better incentives to drive more responsible actions. I'm very hopeful about the days and the weeks and the years to come. As we wrap up this conversation, what are some final thoughts that you want to share with our audience about the importance of circular economy practices?
So, following up on my message at the very beginning, I think looking at your materials is going to give you the biggest lever to impact your brand and society and the planet. What you eat is very important. What you wear, a lot more than where it comes from or where it's been made. And that is something that you can approach in a highly structured way. And it's just a great way of looking at your products that you consume, make, and sell.
Thank you, Jörg. I think there's one key takeaway for me from this conversation is to focus on the what. I love what you said earlier about the how, the where, the when are important. I'm sure the why is super important as well, but thinking about the what in a very critical and thoughtful way is extremely important to drive positive behavior. Jörg, this has been an incredible session. I learned a lot. It was very insightful. I loved hearing about the practicalities and potential of circular economy. To our listeners, we hope this episode has inspired you to think about the sustainability of the products you use and the materials they're made from. I hope you all leave this conversation with at least one change that you intend to make in the following few days, few weeks. I'm really excited to continue this podcast. I'm excited to welcome you next time on Sustainability Voices for more conversations that drive us towards sustainable action. Jörg, thank you so much. We learned so much today, and I hope that we've been able to drive some positive impact coming out of this episode. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. I greatly enjoyed our conversation.
This is the Sustainability Voices podcast. You can find all episodes of the show at esgflo.com, Spotify, YouTube, Google, and Apple Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd like for you to subscribe to stay connected. I look forward to welcoming you on the next episode of Sustainability Voices. My name is Patrick Obeid. You can find me on LinkedIn. Thanks so much for listening.